Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai. Welcome to another Mettā Lab, our weekly slow sessions. Hope this finds you well. Let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem, homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. So as we've been developing, we have just completed the Karaniyametta Sutta. So we've gone through the whole gatha, or the different verses, and we should be practicing that meditation and developing it well. So this week we'll be starting on the next one, which is developing the first doorway to Nibbāna, also known as painful practice with slow realization. And in Pali, that is Dukkha Patipada Dandabhinya. So that's what we'll cover over the next few weeks, again taking it very slowly. And then eventually we'll develop Metta with the 7 enlightenment factors, as well as liberation of mind by loving kindness. So let's first start looking at how to get the best out of this session, how we normally start the session. So again, take Buddha's words fresh. We normally do these sutta meditations from start to finish. And what we're aiming for is to understand the meaning behind the Buddha's words. What is his miracle of instruction? How do we decode his words? And so a lot of the time, particularly with Karaniyametta, we were giving up those unskilled states in order to develop the skilled ones. And with the meditation we're kicking off this week, it's slightly different, but again, it's a similar thing. It's how to contemplate the Dhamma correctly. And by contemplating the Dhamma correctly, we get to understand the meaning and we uplift the mind. So be okay with not understanding everything. As we've always said, it's a gradual practice, gradual training, and gradual progress. So lean into any new Pali words, particularly new ones that are coming up in this particular new sutta that we're looking at. Also, the different kinds of suttas that we refer to. And just be happy with whatever's possible for the session. It's always good to have that kind of inclination in the mind. Remember that we're all learners. So these are seekers or trainees on the noble path. So with these sessions, we lean on each other, lean on each other's aspiration, our effort, and being able to meditate together. And so we encourage each other by coming together to walk the noble path together. And this is a time for putting down some of our responsibilities. We might have had a very busy week, and so we come together now to actually put down some of those roles and responsibilities. We can pick them up afterwards and think of it like self-care, that during these sessions we hear the Buddha's words, it uplifts our mind. It also helps us to clean the mind and calm it down, and we concentrate it as well. So by concentrating it, we're able to develop it, and then we lift the mind even further. So take a check of your mind right now, as we always do, week to week, to see what the mind's like right now. Is it tired? Is it sad? Is it happy? Is it joyful? How's it going in the mind? And so if you take a bit of a check of it now at the end of the session, again, check again and see whether it has lifted, become a little more wholesome. And then when we meditate, as we usually do, we need to take our own examples. So this is just a reminder. It's very important. That's how we connect with the Dhamma. Otherwise, it becomes Dhamma that just sits on the shelf and we're trying to connect it, but we don't fully connect it. So when we try and apply it to our own examples, it's a very good way to see whether we understand the Dhamma. As always, we're not here to make ourselves feel bad using our own examples. We use it in order to develop metta, in order to develop an insight pathway given by the Buddha. So let's have good wishes for everyone that's helped us on this spiritual path, and anyone who's online right now with us. Have good wishes. Wish everyone well. So for this particular Mettā Lab slow session, we'll begin with a short meditation so we can practice the Karaniyametta Sutta. And then following that, there are some questions that have come in about the meditation that we've just been going through over the past few weeks. So we'll address those questions and answers. I'm not entirely sure how long it will take because there's about 6 or 7 questions. And then after that, we'll go through the context for the next meditation and an overview of the first meditation or first doorway to Nibbāna. So that's the plan for this slow session. So let's begin with a short meditation. So we have learned the 15 steps and also how we spread loving kindness. So let's get ourselves into a comfortable position. I won't go through all the steps again, but the main thing is to follow the insight pathway. And what I would recommend is to spend some time developing it, maybe 5 minutes developing the core qualities of metta, and then maybe another 5 minutes to actually spread metta. And if the mind goes to a very still space, to abide there in loving kindness. So let's do a short meditation now. Have a noble intention that we are removing the unwholesome states or unskilled states in order to develop the loving kindness. And we want to develop supramundane loving kindness. So we want to have those skilled states. Okay, let's do a short meditation. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Blessings of the Triple Gem. We can come out of our meditation. So we can now turn to some of the questions that have been asked about Karaniyametta Sutta. So the first question is, what meditations would you recommend to prepare the mind for loving kindness? So if you've only got a short time for the meditation, I don't think it's necessary to do anything or any other meditation before developing loving kindness. So say, for example, if you've only got 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, sometimes it's good just to do the actual insight pathway for Karaniyametta Sutta. But if you have more time, like if you have a few hours or you have a day of practice, then there are meditations that I think are quite useful, and we have spoken about some of them in the past in some of our Metta slow sessions. So the first one I would recommend is Nibbāna Sutta, what makes us easy to instruct. And if you remember with Nibbāna Sutta, we briefly touched on it with when we went through easy to instruct, and we were saying, well, there's these 16 particular dukkha qualities, the things that make us difficult to instruct. And when we abandon them, then what happens is we come to be able to have the qualities which are easy to instruct. So this particular meditation is very, very important, particularly for loving kindness, because if you don't have the difficult to instruct qualities, it makes you quite wise. And so when you develop Nibbāna over a period of time, and you start to see that there are certain evil wishes that are in the mind or bad wishes, if you start to see that there's a lot of me and mine kicking in, a lot of self-identification where we glorify ourselves and have contempt for others, what makes us angry, what makes us not willing to accept feedback or instruction, and then those qualities that are mental stains in the mind, and the most difficult one is the last one, which is adhering to one's own view and not being able to give it up. Even when we do Karaniyametta Sutta, you can see when people struggle with this meditation, it's not because there's something wrong with the Buddha's instructions. It's mainly that we have obstructions and blocks within ourselves, whether we know it or not. And then when we start to look at something like Nibbāna Sutta, it makes it so much easier for us to take the medicine that is Karaniyametta, that the way Buddha asks us to develop the meditation, to realize path and fruit, to be able to develop towards Nibbāna, is actually very powerful. And I think over a series of weeks, we've seen that it's not this sugary, nicey nice meditation. It's a meditation that purifies a lot of things through body, speech, and mind. And we develop wisdom through it. So Nibbāna is a particular sutta that it actually shows where we block Dhamma, that there are things that we cultivate, that we've been conditioned by, and then we cultivate and we won't let go of certain qualities. And so when we let them go, it makes the Karaniyametta much easier. And in the case of Nibbāna Sutta, one can go straight to Nibbāna, so straight to prudent, if all these good qualities are there, easy to instruct. So that's one I would recommend in terms of being able to develop before loving kindness. This is always helpful. And what you'll notice when you actually do that and then you do the loving kindness is that the meditation goes really smoothly and there's not so much to clean up. The same thing applies for the other meditation I would recommend, which is the Vatuppama Sutta. So this is a very popular sutta because, well, in my mind, it's a very popular sutta because these are the mental stains, a bit like Nibbāna, but in a slightly different way, but very similar, because if you look at both meditations, what is driving mental stains are sick perceptions, unprofitable perceptions, and usually they're very imbued in identification with oneself, as well as what is me and mine. So when you start to clean this up, it makes so many different things possible, particularly taking to the Buddha's instructions. So this is a very good one to do. This is a particular meditation that I would often couple together with loving kindness. I would run through Vatuppama Sutta, and then I would do loving kindness in accordance with Karaniyametta Sutta. And what you notice is one can practice Vatuppama Sutta and do the inner bathing, the cleaning, the noble washing, But each and every time one thinks, oh, I've cleaned before, there's nothing there. But it always surprises me over many, many years that there's always something that arises. It's either something that arose during the day, something that we're still holding on to for a number of weeks, or it could be something that arises that you admit from childhood or from previous parts of our lives where you think, oh, I don't need to actually hold on to this anymore, and this is applicable to one of these mental stains. So I find that Vatupama Sutta works really well in preparing the mind, and it's very smooth. One would go through, similar to Anumana, you would get to the wisdom very quickly in terms of prudent, Nibbāna. So this is another one that I would recommend. And the third one I would recommend is the 5 subjects to frequently contemplate, because what we'll see when we do this next meditation, which is first doorway to Nibbāna, I've said that Metta is very powerful when one has a great understanding of the First Noble Truth of suffering. So when you look at these 5 subjects to frequently contemplate, it becomes very clear that if you do this contemplation about these 5 subjects, so I'm subject to old age, I'm not exempt from old age, and then I'm not the only one. All beings are subject to that. Same with illness, same with death. And then to understand that we will be parted and separated from everyone and everything dear and agreeable to us. And we're not the only one. All beings are in the same boat. And then the 5th one being about karma, that we're the owners of our karma, heirs to our karma. And we have karma as our origin, karma as our relative, karma as our resort. And we will be the heirs of whatever karma, good or bad, that we do. And we're not the only ones. All living beings are in the same boat. So by the time we go through the first doorway to Nibbāna, this one will also become quite clear, because through the Karaniyametta Sutta, it's not always clear that the First Noble Truth of suffering underpins it. But once you work your way through first doorway to Nibbāna and you see how it intersects, you'll see it. So this is another good meditation to do prior, if you have time, to prepare the mind for loving kindness in accordance with Karaniyametta Sutta. Because when we say, particularly with arrogance, but even when we get to that step and we say, what is there to be arrogant about if we're subject to these things? It really hits home when you've contemplated it deeply. And it's very, very powerful, because quite often what blocks us, mental stains, verbal misconduct, bodily misconduct, why they arise is because we have this wrong view. We're all up in our own business, what's me and what's mine. And so we're very protective of that. And that's why stinginess becomes such a huge obstruction to loving kindness. So just on that note, this would be the other meditation I would recommend if you have time and you wish to prepare the mind. So then the next question is, what should I do if my mind wanders off while I'm taking my own example? So yes, we often take our own examples for Karaniyametta Sutta, particularly to develop the core qualities. What I would say is not to worry about it wandering off. Right at the beginning, when you start to learn the meditation, it does tend to wander off, because we do find our own examples particularly delicious, particularly interesting. And so when we bring an example, maybe it's from work, maybe it's from a relationship or something like that, then what happens is, in the beginning, it does have a propensity to wander off and go with the story, go with the example, and then maybe even find its way somewhere else. So that's normal. But I would also share that over time, when you start to train the mind, when you start to get very familiar with this method that the Buddha uses for us to meditate, it stops doing that, because the intention behind the meditation becomes very, very clear. It becomes, yes, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm not doing it because I want to go through examples just for the stories and get caught up in it. I'm actually doing the meditation in order to develop loving kindness. So I'm going to bring my mind back. So my advice would be, when the mind wanders off, don't berate the mind. Don't get angry with it. Just bring it back. Just bring it back to, what is it that I'm actually trying to do here? Which is, I'm trying to actually clean the mind. I'm trying to do some noble washing. So for example, if you're doing step number 4, we want to develop gentleness because it's a quality we need to develop in order to have loving kindness. So what we're abandoning is the harshness, the rudeness, whether it's physical or verbal at that step. So if the example is that day we got into a verbal kind of thing, maybe not with a person, but in our mind, and we were actually articulating it, verbalizing it in our mind. Say someone cut us off on the road. And so we use that example, and then suddenly it goes into all the details of that example and then ends up somewhere else. Then what you would do is just to bring it back. When you catch it, just bring it back and just make sure you complete it by saying, okay, well, I need to abandon that because I wouldn't like someone to be cussing me out in their mind if I do some kind of mistake. And at that point, you would say, well, I disapprove of this. If I continue to have that kind of rudeness in my mind towards others, then I'm not gentle. If I'm not gentle, then there's a hole in my metta bucket. And so you fulfill that. So each and every time as you find that you catch yourself wandering off, you bring it back and you complete the step and be happy that you catch it. So don't berate yourself, but be happy that you catch the mind wandering off. And that's just being able to train the mind. The other thing that can be helpful with that is if it happens often is to actually stop in your meditation and just make a strong intention. Like, I'm doing this meditation, my mind keeps wandering off, but I'm trying to train the mind. I'm trying to develop loving kindness. So that's my noble intention here. I'm using the example in order to develop loving kindness. So in that way, it also helps to clear it out. And so that might be also helpful. So then the next question is, what's the best way to teach my children Buddha's loving kindness? Do they have to be a certain age to be able to understand it? So the short answer is yes, you can teach loving kindness to your children. And do they have to be a certain age? Well, what I would say is that for children who are under 10 years old, the recommendation is that it's best to teach them up to step number 7, so up to Nibbāna, prudent. So the reason for that is because it gets a little more complicated afterwards, and it's good to enable them to develop some precepts, develop some skilled states. So particularly if a child is less than 10, it's very doable. So it helps them to lean towards virtue. It helps to have that conversation about precepts. And often if they find that we are exemplifying and developing these kinds of things, they get interested, particularly when they're young, and they want to be like us. So they'll often try to mimic us. So there's been sessions where kids have been listening to online sessions with their parents. And what happens is they start to go step 1, and then they try and develop certain sila, certain virtue along with their parents. And then you find them afterwards counting step 1, step 2, or grade 1, grade 2. And then when their parents ask them, what are you doing? Then they say, oh, I'm trying to develop this. And then what happens is they develop an interest, and then you help them out. And it becomes a really nice thing to do with them, which is, I suppose, where your question is coming from. So it's also helpful to motivate them and encourage them, because a lot of these things will help them out when they go to school, when they're with their friends, when they're with other people, other relatives, so that they start to learn about these things and then also start to embody these things. Because you can imagine at school these days, and even in the past, there's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of preferences, there's a lot of different kinds of speech, and children, without knowing and sometimes knowing, they can hurt each other. And so these sorts of things, when you instill them in children, it becomes really good for them to be able to navigate what happens when there are different types of situations at school. And having the ability to navigate them early on is really helpful. And it also helps them to learn how to pick good friends, friends with good qualities and things like that. So the other thing I would say is to be able to sort of tell them it's a superpower, particularly for young children. So with young children below the age of 10, sometimes when we teach this to kids below 10, what we say to them, it's like a superpower. Metta is like a superpower because where Superman has the power of being able to fly, being able to have X-ray vision, or Spider-Man being able to climb buildings, those sorts of things. When we develop loving kindness for children, they like to know about what abilities do we have. So there's certain abilities that would interest them. Maybe the ones about sleep. I mean, young kids these days have trouble sleeping. So a superpower could be having the ability to go to sleep easily, waking easily, no bad dreams. It could also be being dear to humans, dear to non-humans, protected by devas. All these different things are actually interesting to children. Even the one about fire, poison, weapons cannot harm. That sounds like a superpower. So that's another way of being able to share it with children. And if we understand that these are the blessings of loving kindness, then in a way, children can also see it that way too. And so it's good when you teach children to take them step by step. So you wouldn't take them up to step number 7 all in one go if you didn't want to, depending how young they are. So if they're 6, 7, 8, you can teach them very, very gradually, just, with step 1. And the other way that we often teach kids is by calling it Metta school. So in that way, they understand what school is. And so you start with grade 1, which is upright. If I just go back to that other slide with upright, so you know that there's 7 things there. There are 3 which are about physical conduct, and there's 4 which are about verbal conduct. So very, very gradually, you teach them grade 1. So it's really up to you. You can teach them all of it depending on how motivated and how interested the kids are. But at the same time, even beginning just with grade 1 upright, it's very helpful, and helping them to see examples. And kids are very switched on when it comes to examples. They love examples, and they even have their own examples. I remember certain children had certain examples even for Vatupama Sutta, the simile of the cloth. They were able to say different examples about coveting clips of their friends, or coveting toys of their friends. So the same thing applies to loving kindness, that it is very possible to teach them. Now, children who are over 10 years old, it's possible to teach them all the way through. And of course, on Sutta Meditation series, there's Metta School, and there's also a guided meditation, which is helpful. So there's different ways that one can do it, but I would strongly encourage, because if we are developing loving kindness, there's no reason why children cannot also learn. And if they're very young, then you only take them up to a certain point, which is probably up to prudent. And so they learn through us, which is very helpful. And over time, the other thing I notice is that children have a lot of questions, that once you start to explain things, they have questions. And it's very good to nurture that, particularly questions about loving kindness. That if they start to ask why, why is that not gentle, or what does arrogance mean? I mean, these are very good things for us to instill in our kids, for them to understand. And so it's something really wholesome, to be able to share that with our kids. So that's a lovely question. So the next question is, if I'm honest, I have some grudges that are holes in my metta bucket. Some are family members who I live with, while others are people at work. Do you have any advice on how to overcome grudges as part of developing metta? Okay, so grudges we know to be the same as hostility, or labeling. In Pali, that word is upanaha. So we know that when we spread loving kindness, when we develop it, particularly all the way through, the Buddha says we want to develop immeasurable loving kindness without hatred, without hostility, without obstruction. So even when we talk about divisiveness or disparaging, the condition for that is actually hostility, or this grudging. So we know that hostility, grudging, it's when we've escalated the anger. It's become really solidified, permanent, and we're holding on to it. One thing I would say is, with your question, is it's really great that you're able to see it. And it's really great that you're acknowledging it as a hole in the metta bucket. So with that, you can deepen the meditation practice. So I'll first go through like the Karaniyametta. Take your time with the Karaniyametta, particularly step number 3 when it comes to easy to instruct. So when it comes to disparaging, the condition for it is grudging. So that's the step where you first really start to look at it. You really start to look at the example, and I'll go through some advice on how to do that. The other steps where it appears to give us almost like a second bite of the cherry, and second or third bite of the cherry, is step number 11 and step number 12, when we look at without anger, without ill will. So if we're still holding on to grudges, it's something that we get to look at again, because it's coming out of anger and ill will. And so there are things that we spoke about in terms of understanding the nature of death, understanding the spectrum or range of death. And we also, when we looked at ill will, to look at the aging phenomena as well. Why are we still having ill will if we understand that? So these are things in the meditation that as you deepen, you'll start to chip away at some of these grudges. Now, sometimes with the formal meditation, it doesn't seem doable. So I can probably add a few more things here. And this is what I've noticed for myself, and also from talking to other Kalyanamittas and other people who've had this kind of question. So one of the things with grudges, which you've already done, is to actually see that it is a problem. It's a block, it's obstruction, it's a hole in the metta bucket. So what you would like to do really is to shine the light on those particular stories or narratives that are driving those particular grudges. So you've said family members that you live with, as well as people at work. Now, what we tend to do, all of us, what we tend to do is we tend to perpetuate the story or the narrative that is associated with the grudge. So that's what we tend to do. We tend to keep it going. So if we don't keep the story or the narrative going that he or she has harmed me, and we're holding on to that particular story, then what happens is it can't keep bothering us. But when we think about a person and we keep perpetuating the narrative or the story, then what happens is it keeps it's like a thorn in our side. Now, the things that I've noticed about grudges is that we have a propensity in the first instance to lie about certain things. And that's not saying that you do it, I'm saying that all of us do it. And so we need to really look at the grudges and the stories behind it. Like, what do we tell ourselves in order to sustain the grudge? So for example, we might say such and such a person, so it could be the family member or the colleague, is always like that. And so we need to question that and say, are they really? Like, to question ourselves, are they really? So we might be holding on to something that they've been mean to us, just in a very generic sense. They've been mean to us. And so we keep holding on to that as if it's permanent. And so when we question it and say, are they really? You need to really be honest about it, because no one is mean all the time. Like when I question my own examples of grudges, what I find is that I've lied, that really the person has been generous with me at times, or the person has been helpful at times. So what I have convinced myself isn't actually true. And the other thing that we say to ourselves, particularly because, when you think about hostility, inevitably comes from anger, ill will, then you think, oh, this person will harm me again. And again, you need to ask yourself, really? Are we really sure about that? And sometimes what happens is, because of seeing that they've been generous before, or seeing that they've helped someone else out before, then you realize actually it's not true. So this is the way I see it, of actually proving to ourselves that we're not 100%, that there's a flaw in how we're holding the grudge. And that keeps us honest. It sort of helps to dispel the gravity of the grudge, the heat of the grudge. Now, what usually happens is, when the grudge is very strong, we're very reluctant to do it. And so we tend to believe our narrative. So what I would suggest is with a Karaniyametta, someone that you respect, someone that you trust, you talk to them about it. And I've used this before because sometimes, to be very honest, sometimes it's difficult to come out of a grudge. And when you sit with someone who's a good friend, and this is why spiritual friendship is 100% of the spiritual path, is because when you have a good friend in Dhamma, they're willing to be honest with you. They're willing to ask the questions that you ask yourself, but you kind of bulldoze yourself. But with a friend, they ask you and you have to respond. And if you have developed good qualities, then it's very difficult to lie. You don't want to lie to the good friend because, in accordance with Nibbāna Sutta, you don't want them to leave you, to see that you can't be helped. So there's been times where I've used difficult ones, difficult grudges, and I've used a good friend to actually help me through. And all it is I start to listen to myself and I start to listen to the answer. And sometimes it starts out being dishonest. And then I realize as I'm talking to the good friend, and the good friend is responding kindly, but holding the honesty, holding my feet to the fire. And then I've had to look at it and then remember Anumana, that I want to be easy to instruct. I want to be someone who can receive feedback. That's why I'm coming to the good friend. And then what happens is I'm turning it around. I'm starting to admit, I'm starting to see, I'm starting to feel moral shame. I'm starting to feel fear of wrongdoing, the guardians. These are the guardians that help us to walk this path, to develop it. And so it can be a really beautiful thing. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's a really beautiful thing when it works. And it takes kindness on the other party, the good friend, to be able to not blame, judge, whatever, but to be able to be helpful in that instance and to navigate through with you. And so that can be really helpful. And in that way also you're using logic. Like Dhamma doesn't mean we don't use logic. We have to use logic because sometimes in order for us to correct our narratives, our lies in the mind, is to use logic and to prove to ourselves it's not true. Every time we think someone's so mean, so horrible, so nasty, it's not 100% true. And so we need to navigate our way through that. So the other thing I would say is the second part to that is that what I find when it comes to grudges is that we can be really petty, and it's good to call ourselves out, to admit that, because in a world full of demands and responsibilities, we can hold some really petty grudges. And it's about all kinds of petty things. So it could be holding a long-standing grudge because someone doesn't return a phone call on time. It could be a grudge because we've been left waiting on Zoom for a long time before people start to come. Or it could be we've not been offered a seat in a particular occasion or a particular time, or we've not been invited, we've been left out. Or it could be we haven't been praised enough or not praised at all for something that we thought we did that was good. So there's many different things. Those are just a few, but we can hold grudges over the simplest of things. It can be the most mundane things about forgetting to cook or forgetting to pick up something or all kinds. So when you reflect on this, a lot of the things that come up that are petty, if we really look at them, they do come back to evil or bad wishes. That there's something in us that the Buddha would say, this is like the first one in Nibbāna Sutta, that we have certain wishes where we actually think ourselves very important. And so when that's the case, it's good to really see how petty it is. Most of the time when we have difficulty, the sense of self is the one that's kicking in. When the sense of self is absent, a lot of these mental stains are not there. So it's really important to ask ourselves, do I really need to hold on to these things? Would I like it if others thought of me with this kind of attitude, this kind of grudge? And maybe when you reflect on it that way, then what happens is one thinks, oh, maybe I can let this slide. Maybe I don't need to be so difficult about this. And maybe the other person didn't intentionally do whatever they did. So maybe they didn't intentionally not call me back on time, or maybe they didn't intentionally leave me waiting or something. Maybe they didn't intentionally leave me out. And so what we see is the amount of conceit that we hold in order to bear grudges. So that's another way of looking at it. And I have one more actually. So this last bit of advice actually comes from something I've cultivated for about 20 years. And it's really something that has proven very, very useful and very practical when it comes to ill will, anger, and grudges. And this is without having to say or do anything to a person, like the person that we're having a grudge against. And there's basically 3 steps. So what you do is you actually imagine the person that you have a grudge against in front of you, just in your mind's eye. So just imagine with your eyes closed, they're sitting in front of you. So the first step is you say, I'm sorry if I have hurt you or upset you or done something that has affected you in a negative way. So the first step is basically, I'm sorry. So that's already a very hard step, because we find it very hard to say I'm sorry to anyone. And so if you're able to do it, that's a really big step. The second step is to say, I forgive you. I forgive you for whatever it is you've done to me that has affected me. So the second step is I forgive you. And again, that's a very, very difficult one. When you think about grudges, the main thing that we can't do is to forgive, whether it's something petty or it's something that's happened in the past. Some of the grudges we have are decades long, and some of them are just, each and every day there's a grudge. So being able to forgive is something that it can be very helpful. You picture the person in front of you, you say sorry, and then you forgive. And then the third step is, I wish you well. So this is a form of mundane metta. So I would always say Karaniyametta Sutta is way more powerful, because one purifies by body, speech, and mind. One has 10 skilled states using Karaniyametta Sutta. But in terms of just practical stuff, mundane living, I've used this for a very long time because I find it works. We're all connected, whether we like it or not. Like all the people at work are connected. We go to work and all the people there are connected to us. We live in a family. All those people are connected to us. Our extended families are connected to us. In fact, the whole world is connected to us. So when you think about this type of cleaning, I'm sorry, I forgive, I wish you well. If you clean your side of that connection, then it naturally has an impact on the other side of the connection over time. And it can be instantaneous, but it can definitely work over time. And the thing about this kind of loving kindness, it's a very mundane loving kindness, but in a way you chip away at grudges, because you're doing things that are very, very difficult to do. You might never be able to say it to the person in person, but you can do it with your eyes closed, just picturing them in front of you. If you can even do it once, that's amazing. And at the same time, you'll find that they respond to you differently. That's what I've noticed with this particular practice. And so if you build it up over time, it becomes a bit of a go-to thing. Like you go to the airport, you do it to everybody. Like as you greet people in your mind, you can do it just before you go to check in your bags and get your ticket. You can do it while you're on public transport and you're having to sit next to somebody, or the bus is or train is very crowded, and you can just do it while you're there. You can do it while you're sitting with your family, but without actually saying it out loud. You can do that when you're in your work cubicle or office and actually cultivate it. It can be very helpful, even in stressful situations. It can be very helpful if you need to apply for something or you need to go for an interview. All these different scenarios, you can picture the person in front of you and you can actually say, I'm sorry, I forgive, I wish you well. And it can be in general. I think with this type of meditation, what happens is you recognize that knowingly and definitely unknowingly, we can affect people. We can hurt people without knowing. We can hurt people with our body language. We can hurt people with our words directly. We can hurt people even with how we look at people. We can hurt people by ignoring people. So when you know that, then this type of, I guess, manifestation practice can be very useful. But again, let me just reiterate, the Buddha's meditation, Karaniyametta Sutta, is far more powerful. So let's go to the next question. Can I spread loving kindness to a relative or friend who has passed away? So what I would say is follow the insight pathway for Karaniyametta Sutta because it would include all living beings. So if you think about a departed relative who has passed away or a friend who has passed away, if they haven't realized Nibbāna, then they would be included in the loving kindness because they would have either come to another existence or they would be seeking existence. And so when you look at our Karaniyametta Sutta, when you look at when the Buddha says those that are already in existence, so say for example if the friend or relative has passed away and then they're still seeking existence, or if they passed away and they've been reborn quite soon after into another existence, or they're still seeking to exist, sorry. So one is they've already passed away and they've come to an existence, and the other one is they're still seeking existence, then they would be included in that. And same with upward, downward, and across. So it would cover it. So it would be included. So what I would say, particularly with this supramundane practice, why I'm dissuading in a way from particular relatives and friends is because throughout this meditation, Buddha is always encouraging right view, encouraging us not to be attached to groups and families, like not yearning to associate with families or groups. So if we in our mind just start to think about someone who's departed, then in a way what's happening is we're allowing the wrong view to kick in again when we've already cleaned it. So we've cleaned it to say not me and mine because we don't want any holes in our metta bucket. We actually want to spread to all living beings. And when you see that it includes those already in existence and those still seeking existence, upward, downward, and across, then when you cultivate the full meditation, you know that even your departed relative would be included in this. So when we spread, may all living beings be happy and well, may all living beings be free from suffering, they're included. So that's how I would answer that question, just so that we don't get into trouble with inviting wrong view back in, because then it would be only me and my family, only the people I like, not the ones I don't like, and that sort of thing. Those are the people that agree with my point of view, not the other ones. Okay, so the next question is, can you comment on the flow of how we're supposed to develop this Karaniyametta meditation? How much time to spend on developing the qualities of loving kindness and then spreading loving kindness? So I think I alluded a little bit to this at the beginning when we were about to start our meditation. I think it's good to kind of develop it in equal parts. So equal parts developing the qualities of loving kindness depending on how long you have, and then developing the same amount of time spreading loving kindness. So when you're learning the insight pathway, it can feel like you spend all your time or most of the time in the developing part where we're cleaning the mind and we're coming to the wholesome qualities. And of course, we want to become skilled. So what happens is over time, as you keep practicing, you do become more skilled at developing the qualities very quickly. So by the time you've practiced this a lot, you can run through those qualities quite quickly because you know where your sticky points are. And so it can be very, very quick. Now, in the beginning, it's very good to take your time because I think what happens is the purification process and the foundation for loving kindness becomes very strong. And that can be really good for the meditation. So taking your examples, really cleaning it up, doing the noble washing, inner bathing, very, very good. So what I would say is if you have 30 minutes, then try to get to the point where you spend 15 minutes on the developing the qualities, like developing the insight pathway, and then 15 on spreading. And when I say spreading metta, I think that also means the point where the mind becomes naturally still and abides in loving kindness. So it can feel as if loving kindness is emanating from us, that it's all around us as well, because we're imbued with loving kindness, is what I think I'm trying to say. So even if one is doing walking meditation, each step, by the time loving kindness is very, very much developed and you've spread, there comes a point where it's almost like you're floating each step and you don't feel the need to spread the loving kindness. That kind of falls away, but each step feels like loving kindness is just pouring out of you. And the same with sitting meditation or lying down or standing up. The same thing, you get to the point where you've developed everything and then you're spreading it in all directions and all that sort of thing. And then what happens is it naturally just drops. You don't feel like you need to keep spreading to say, may all beings be well, may all beings be free from suffering, may it be in that direction or this direction. It actually feels like it falls away. And then it feels like loving kindness is emanating from you in all directions with no effort. And so that's part of the spreading of loving kindness, that if you're spending 15 minutes on the developing part, then 15 minutes on the spreading, that includes when you get to the still point and the mind is very still, but it's just emanating the loving kindness. So that's how I would answer that question. Okay, so we just have, I think, one more question. And it says, when we develop metta using this method, Karaniyametta Sutta, is it linked to the jhānas? So the answer is yes, it's linked to the jhānas, as in we develop the jhānas as part of this. And that's because when we said before that loving kindness and the Noble Eightfold Path, they're rooted in the same things. And when we develop the skilled states in loving kindness, we're actually developing the Noble Eightfold Path. So we activate the Noble Eightfold Path, so it's very possible to enter into the jhanas, and of course it culminates in loving kindness. So that's why even at step one, like step one of uju, upright, if one understands the magnitude of giving up the 7 unskilled states by body and speech, so we give up killing, we give up taking what is not given, we give up sexual misconduct, so that's the bodily actions or the bodily misconduct, and we give up the false speech, the divisive speech, and also the harsh speech, and also the frivolous speech. So when you realize when you give them up, that's when you start to develop the kusala, the skilled states. So we don't kill, we don't take what is not given, all those things. Then what happens is it activates the right view. So on this slide, you see we start to activate the right view even at the first step. So we start to renunciate all the bad kinds of things. And that includes, of course, the wrong speech. We renunciate, and so we develop right speech, we develop the right action. And so you see, what happens is we go towards right concentration. So even at the first step, and if you remember in one of our guided meditations, I think I asked you to reflect on the fact that it's a really big thing to be able to give up, to be able to abandon the unskilled states. And that can make the mind really happy. So that's an entry point to the jhanas, because right concentration can actually arise there. But the same throughout the other steps of the meditation. The same thing equally applies. So what happens with Karaniyametta Sutta, and also applies with the next meditation we're going to learn, which is painful practice with slow realization, or first doorway to Nibbāna, is we get to experience what the Buddha calls moving between these high and luxurious beds that the Buddha would use. And so he spoke about this in the Vinagga Pura Sutta. This is in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, discourse number 63. And what happened was a Brahmin, and there were some lay people there, but this particular Brahmin, Vinagga, he came to ask the Buddha about high and luxurious seats or beds. He was saying, oh, the Buddha has such a lovely complexion and well taken care of. He must receive a lot of high and luxurious beds. And so he, in his terms, he was talking about opulent beds and decorated ones out of different kinds of cloth and different kinds of animal hides. So that was his perspective. But the Buddha corrected him by saying that those who had gone forth, it's very hard to find the kinds of beddings that this Brahmin was talking about. And even if they're obtained, they're not allowed. So they're not an allowable for the Sangha. And so then the Buddha said to this Brahmin that there's actually 3 high and luxurious seats that or beds that the Buddha would gain at will without trouble or difficulty. And so the first one is the celestial or heavenly high and luxurious bed, which is the Dibbā Uchaya Sayana Mahasayana. And then the second one is the divine high and luxurious bed, so the Brahma Ucha Sayana Mahasayana. And so that's the Brahma Viharas, the celestial heavenly ones is the jhānas. And then the third one is the noble, the Arya Ucha Sayana Mahasayana, so the noble attainments. And then Buddha said those are the 3 kinds of high and luxurious beds that he gains at will or without trouble or difficulty. So when we develop the Karaniyametta Sutta, we actually have access to all 3, and at least 2 if one doesn't have noble attainment through this meditation. So in terms of the jhanas, it's possible to develop jhanas right at the outset of the meditation and then swap seats to develop loving kindness by the end of the meditation. And at the same time, if one is able to either develop path and fruit, which through Karaniyametta one can develop the path and fruit of non-return, then you swap that seed to that. Or if one already has noble attainment, whether it's stream enterer, once returner, or non-return, then you can swap seats by actually meditating on that. So that's what the Buddha means. So even in this meditation, Karaniyametta Sutta, it's possible to do that. You see how you swap the beds or swap the seats. And in the painful practice with slow realization, that is also possible, and we will go through that as well. Now, one important point is that although the Buddha talks about these 3 kinds of high and luxurious beds, the most important point to remember, even though we can develop these kinds of skills in meditation, it's important to remember that realizing Nibbāna, we need to give up these kinds of high and luxurious beds or seats, the ones that we can gain at will or without trouble or difficulty. So a seika is able to develop these meditations, do them very well, and that's what you see in your meditation. But if we crave them, cling to them out of wrong view or ignorance, then what happens is we won't realize Nibbāna. We'll be following the greed path. So if we crave or cling to the jhanas, if we crave or cling to any of the Brahma Viharas, or even to the noble attainments, then what happens is we're actually walking the greed path. And that's something that we realize through another meditation. So the important point here is to always remember, despite being able to develop these things, that we need to give them up in order to attain something better, and that is Nibbāna, the supreme safety, the supreme happiness of Nibbāna. Okay, that's the end of the questions. Okay, so we're now at 7, so it's been about an hour. I think I still have time to give a bit of a context and overview of the first doorway to Nibbāna, so I think we should do that now. So let me just do a quick refresh about why did the Buddha teach loving kindness, because I think it's good to just reframe our mind again. So we said it's about protection. Yes, we could see that in terms of developing Karaniyametta, and we will also see that in terms of painful practice with slow realization. I think it's because we're always in danger if we don't understand that we are bound to ignorance and craving. And so when we learn this next meditation, it becomes very clear that we want to lean towards Nibbāna. It comes across very strongly in the next meditation. In terms of anger, not so much that we see this as a direct thing in the next meditation, but we definitely saw this when we were looking at Karaniyametta. And then in terms of the developing the mind, very much so, very, very much so, that the next meditation, as well as being able to do Karaniyametta is very, very helpful for developing the mind. What you will have noticed is we develop wisdom very strongly. When we don't understand certain Dhammas, we keep chipping away until we do, because what is obstructing us are hindrances, mental stains, even lots and lots of different tenacious wrong views that we're holding on to. And so each time we develop certain meditations, it helps us to overcome that. So we will see that in terms of being able to develop this next meditation. And of course, towards Nibbāna, this next meditation will make that very, very clear, because first we'll wait to Nibbāna. Okay, so I'd like to give a bit of context for why we do this painful practice with slow realization, and it comes down to the 4 kinds of nutriment. So you will see in the Sutta Pitaka, the Pali Canon, particularly when it talks about one thing, the Buddha would often say beings are sustained by nutriment. And Venerable Sariputta also repeated this one thing in one of the longer discourses towards the end of the Digha Nikaya. Beings are sustained by nutriment. Now, when we look at the 4 kinds of nutriment, I'll read it out. It says, bhikkhus, there are these 4 kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be and for the assistance of those about to come to be. What for? The first is the physical nutriment, gross or subtle. The second is contact as nutriment. Third is mental volition as nutriment. The fourth is consciousness as nutriment. These are the 4 kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be and for the assistance of those about to come to be. So what we will see is that that's how we are sustained. We are sustained on these different things. And what we will also see is where consciousness steadies in order to keep constructing. And so Buddha then says, because these 4 kinds of nutriment have what as their source, what as their origin, from what are they born and produced. These 4 kinds of nutriment have craving as their source, craving as their origin. They are born and produced from craving. And this craving has what as its source, what as its origin, from what is it born and produced. This craving has feeling as its source, feeling as its origin. It is born and produced from feeling. And then it repeats the same thing for contact. And then contact has the 6 sense bases as its source. And then the same thing. It then says 6 sense bases as the source for contact. Then 6 sense bases has name and form as the source. And then it repeats that name and form has the source of consciousness. Then consciousness has volitional formations as its source. And then volitional formations has ignorance as its source. So what it is describing is dependent origination. So without going into too much technical detail, what the Buddha is saying is that because of craving for these 4 kinds of nutriment, it kicks off the paticca samuppada, the dependent origination, and what it's conditioned by are all these various things. And the main thing, of course, is ignorance. Now, what I would recommend is if you haven't gone through the 4 nutriment series, it's very useful to go through the 4 nutriment series. The one that we are focusing on for this painful practice with slow realization or first doorway to Nibbāna will be the profitable side of the physical nutriment. So when you think about why we are sick, why we keep going the wrong way, each and every day we're operating through these 4 nutriments. So Buddha says we are sustained by these things, by these nutriments. So when you look at this, what you can see is that consciousness keeps steadying on form as a result of the physical nutriment. It keeps steadying on feeling as a result of the contact as nutriment. It keeps steadying on perception because of mental volition as nutriment. And it keeps steadying on volitional formations as a result of consciousness as nutriment. So each and every day we keep going through these. Now, we are going to focus on the physical nutriment, and we have touched on this when we've looked at the Karaniyametta Sutta, to the extent that we have said that we keep going towards the wrong things. So we keep going towards physical nutriment, the form, the edible food, because we misapprehend. And so because we misapprehend, we keep going out through our senses, and then we go back into the same kind of problem again. So this pathway gives us another way of looking at certain things in terms of the medicine, the antidote that the Buddha wants in order to help us out. Now, the first nutriment, what you can see is we have the perversion that there is attractive in the unattractive. So asubha, subha, vipalasa. So we take something as fair rather than foul. We see beauty instead of something that is ugly, or we see something pleasing in what is not pleasing. And so when we run this path, what happens is sensual desire arises. So when there's sensual desire, what you see is that it escalates. We become bonded to sensual desire or sensual pleasures. We get tied to the wanting, the covetousness. What happens is it activates the taint, the very deep-seated sensual desires, which we take in terms of being very difficult to uproot. And then we are in the flood where we can't go back. We're consumed by that. And so what happens is we start to be affected by this dart of lust. We start to burn with lust. And then what happens is consciousness keeps coming back to the form because it's been poisoned. It's been poisoned by thinking it's attractive in the unattractive. And so what happens is at the end, we go the wrong way through desire. So rather than seeing the truth, we start going towards, oh, this is good. It's worth it. I like it. There's nothing wrong with this thing. And so that's what this pathway is going down. And so we see the same thing with contact as nutriment, mental volition as nutriment, and conscious as nutriment. So I won't go through all of that because that would take a very long time, but you can go through the 4 nutriment series. But the most important thing to understand is why we're doing painful practice with slow realization is because we want the medicine to overcome this pathway. Another way of looking at this pathway is it's the greed path. The second unprofitable direction is the hate path, and combining the third and fourth unprofitable directions is the delusion path. Most people, when they come to meditation, they always start with the mind in terms of mental volition and consciousness, but they don't realize that it's much easier to start looking at this part of the path because this is what we can see very easily, and then to tackle the second one. In actual fact, for where we are now in terms of over 2,500 years after the Buddha, it's very important to understand what this framework is. It's very, very important because when you understand it, it becomes the framework for what you come back to time and time again to understand Dhamma. So what we focus on is the antidote to this. So if I go to the next slide, this is the meditation that we'll be learning, which is painful practice with slow realization. So Buddha gave medicine for each one. Buddha gave painful practice with slow realization as the antidote for the physical nutriment, painful practice with quick realization as the antidote for contact as nutriment, pleasant practice with slow realization as the antidote for mental volition as nutriment, and pleasant practice with quick realization as the antidote for consciousness as nutriment. And again, I would say it's very important for us to know all these modes of practice because they're actually very, very helpful. Now, if you know anything about these modes of practice, Venerable Mahamoggallana, he realized arahantship by practicing the second profitable direction. And Venerable Sariputta, he realized arahantship, the fruit of arahantship, through the fourth profitable direction. And so both of them had very, very strong spiritual faculties because it was with quick realization in both cases. So this is the pathway that we're going to learn, and of course we end up in immeasurable loving kindness. So just to kind of summarize, and this appears in the 4 Nutriment series, as well as there's a series on the doorways to Nibbāna as well. So the ones that have been published for the doorways to Nibbāna is the first one, the second one, the third one, and I'm still to do the fourth one. So that will be coming soon, hopefully. So what we see is when we keep going with the physical nutriment, keep misapprehending, we go the wrong way due to desire. When we keep misapprehending contact as nutriment. We keep going the wrong way due to hate. When we keep going with the mental volition as nutriment, then we keep going the wrong way due to fear. And then consciousness as nutriment, we go the wrong way due to delusion. And then when it comes to the antidote, you can see the Brahmaviharas. They're the doorways to Nibbāna. That if we develop any of these practices, we develop the immeasurable Brahmaviharas. And so it's very profitable. That's why we say profitable, unprofitable. So if one wants the reason for why we come back to samsara, why we keep transmigrating through lifetimes in samsara, it is because we haven't understood certain dhammas, and the nutriments is one of those dhammas. If you've listened to some of the different sessions on, let me think, Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, the exposition of the elements, we talked about acquisitions, and acquisitions, the upadi. Nutriment is one of the acquisitions, one of the 10 that we need to give up in order to realize the fruit of arahantship. And so it's very important to actually understand these things. So what is this insight pathway? Now, we get this from the Pethakopadesa, and it says the painful practice with slow realization, when developed and practiced, continuously fulfills the first meditation. So that basically means when we meditate on the different things that the Buddha asks us to meditate in the Subha Sutta, what happens is it fulfills the first meditation, which means the first jhana. So the first jhana fulfills the first establishment of mindfulness. So we know that the first establishment of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body. So kayanupassana. So then it says the first establishment of mindfulness fulfills the first abiding. And so when we do the kayanupassana, the mindfulness of the body, as part of this meditation, we actually fulfill the Dibbā Vihara, which is the heavenly or celestial abiding or abode, which is the 4 jhanas. And then what it says is the first abiding fulfills the first right endeavor. So that means the first right striving, that we want to not allow any unwholesome things to come into the mind if they haven't arisen. And so that's the first right striving. That's part of this meditation. So if you develop to this point, there's a step in the meditation where we ensure that if unwholesome or unskillful states haven't arisen, we don't allow them to arise. And then the first right endeavor fulfills the first wonderful and marvelous idea. So the first wonderful and marvelous idea is the first noble truth of suffering. So there's a contemplation in this meditation about that, and it's very, very powerful. Then the first wonderful and marvelous idea fulfills the first determination. So our first determination here is really around Nibbāna, because when you actually understand about the first noble truth of suffering, what you realize is you make the determination not for the lies and deceptions of the world, you make the determination for Nibbāna, that which doesn't slide, that which doesn't deceive, that which is safe. And then it says the first determination fulfills concentration due to will. So this is a very powerful step, because this is where we get chanda samadhi. And so chanda samadhi, concentration due to desire, is actually the concentration that would help us to lean towards Nibbāna, and in some cases to realize Nibbāna. And then concentration due to will fulfills restraint of the sense faculties. So what you can see here is the same step that we get to with Santindriyo, but you can see there's a deeper understanding of the Dhamma that we will go through. So if you're a little bit confused at this stage, don't worry. We are going to have slow sessions through each step of this meditation, but this gives you a bit of an idea of what this insight pathway is about. And it's quite interesting, because this is where we connect with the Karaniyametta Sutta, Santindriyo cha Nibbāna, that when we get to this realization that we need to restrain the sense faculties, and this actually helps us to understand Santindriyo much better, that controlled in the sense faculties in the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, it becomes much, much clearer why that's so important, why it would lead to abhija domanassa, the covetousness, and also the sadness that we talk about when we're talking about simile of the tortoise, or talking about when Buddha was talking about sense restraint. This becomes clearer as part of this insight pathway, why it is so important. And so from this point, what we do is we continue with the Karaniyametta Sutta to get to immeasurable loving kindness. So that is the meditation. It says here, just to complete it, restraint of the sense faculties fulfills immeasurable loving kindness. And so we connect with Karaniyametta Sutta in order to do that. So it's a very interesting meditation, and one that really helps on many things. So this is a meditation that is recommended for someone who really sees that they want to overcome the greed path. And that's everyone. So even though I say that, that's everyone. That's all of us. We also use this meditation for someone who wants to overcome, deep-seated craving for the physical nutriment. So it's about people. It's about food. It's about, things that we're caught up in that block our spiritual path. It could even be things like sexual misconduct, pornography. This particular pathway is very helpful. So it's not just metta. Metta is the actual result in terms of where we end up, where we are developing towards, as the antidote to going the wrong way through desire. Instead of going towards people, food, objects, material things, instead we go towards metta. That's the safe place. So this is what we will be meditating on. And just got a couple more slides. What the Buddha says in their Subha Sutta. So this is the sutta that we're going to use to begin our meditation. And the Buddha says in this sutta, because there are 4 modes of practice. What 4? So practice that is painful with slow realization, practice that is painful with quick realization, practice that is pleasant with slow realization, and practice that is pleasant with quick realization. And then on the one about painful with slow realization, he says, here a bhikkhu dwells, firstly, contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, perceiving the repulsiveness of food, perceiving non-delight in the entire world, contemplating impermanence in all conditioned phenomena, and 5, he has the perception of death well established internally. So if you've been following along the profitable perceptions, that particular series, you can see that the Buddha is actually getting us to contemplate profitable perceptions. So these are the ones that are very helpful for this path. And it's also very helpful for painful practice with quick realization as well. So if you have done those meditations in the profitable perception series, then you know what we're talking about here. And if you haven't, not to worry, I will be taking us through examples of each. Now, this sutta actually intends that you do all 5, but actually for our purposes, we can do simply 1. But I will explain what each of those are in brief terms at least, because you can still refer to those Dhamma sessions in order to get a better understanding, because there's multiple ways of developing each step of, or each one. And then the Buddha says, he dwells depending upon these 5 trainee powers, the power of conviction, the power of moral shame, the power of fear of wrongdoing, the power of energy, and the power of wisdom. These 5 faculties, so he's referring to spiritual faculties, arise in him weakly. So they're very feeble or weak. The faculty of conviction, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of concentration, and the faculty of wisdom. Because these 5 faculties are weak, he slowly attains the immediacy condition for the destruction of the taints. So what that last statement means is that because the faculties are weak or blunt, then it takes longer in order to get to the point where one can destroy the taints, where the conditions are all in place in terms of the sharpening of the spiritual faculties. It takes longer to get to the point where you're able to destroy the taints. So that's what that means. So when it comes to the 5 trainee powers, when we think about the power of conviction, This is very similar to the spiritual faculty of conviction. It's when we have confidence, that conviction in the Buddha and in the enlightenment of the Buddha, that the Buddha is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed, trainer of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the blessed one. This is called the power of conviction. And then we have the two guardians, which is the power of moral shame. So that kicks in because we're ashamed if we do misconduct by body, speech, and mind. We're ashamed of cultivating unwholesome, evil qualities. And then the power of the fear of wrongdoing is the other guardian, because we actually fear wrongdoing, that we fear the consequences of doing misconduct by body, speech, and mind, or acquiring evil, unwholesome qualities. That guards us. So very important for the trainee path, because if those things don't kick in, if moral shame doesn't kick in, then we do things shamelessly. It doesn't matter if I do misconduct, if I hunt, if I steal, if I do sexual misconduct, if I speak the way I like, if I have ill will. So one has no shame. But if one has this particular trainee power, then it helps the path. So this is what is helping us to do this particular meditation. And then when it comes to fear of wrongdoing, then if one actually thinks, oh, Buddha has said that there is a result of bad actions, there are consequences if I do these bad things or acquire evil, unwholesome states, then it prevents us from doing those things. And so that is also a guardian, and it helps us. And then the fourth one is the power of energy. So we've talked about energy before, but in the sense of this insight pathway, we need a lot of energy in order to stay the course of the insight pathway, but also to exert energy towards the meditation, not to shirk our duty, not to become negligent. And when we spoke about airs in the Dhamma, that's very important about arousing energy. And then the last one is power of wisdom. And so this meditation in particular, and we touched on this in Karaniyametta Sutta by talking about Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, about arising and passing away of form, for example. This is very strong in this meditation, particularly when we look at Kayanupassana. When we look at that particular step, mindfulness of the body, we will be applying Samadhi Bhavana Sutta because we need the wisdom of the arising and passing away of form, the bigger picture of that. So again, the power of wisdom gets developed. So these are the trainee powers that we apply to the extent that we have them, and we develop as we develop the meditation. So every time we meditate, it's very important to recognize we develop these powers. Every time we meditate, we're sharpening our weak or feeble spiritual faculties. So that's why it's important to train in the insight pathways. So when it comes to spiritual faculties, the faculty of conviction is a similar thing, but our confidence and our conviction towards the Buddha improves as we get the results of what Buddha says in this meditation. This is how it goes. This is the result you should get. When we get the same results, our confidence grows. The power and the spiritual faculty of conviction is directly linked with wisdom as well as right view. So the more right view we have, the more wisdom we have, the more conviction we have. So very, very important to see. And so then we also have the faculty of energy. The only difference between the powers and the faculties, or I must correct myself, trainee powers. So there is a distinction between trainee powers and simply the 5 powers. The 5 powers are the same as the spiritual faculties, but in terms of trainee powers, the distinction is these guardians of moral shame and fear of wrongdoing. So here, the ones that we haven't covered are the faculty of mindfulness. So here, the noble disciple is mindful, possessing supreme mindfulness and discretion, one who remembers and recollects what was done and said long ago. So mindfulness encapsulates remembering what the Buddha has said, what he has instructed, what has been accomplished by the Buddha and the noble ones in order to complete the path. And then we have the faculty of concentration. So one gains concentration, gains one-pointedness of the mind, having made release of the object. So we will see these faculties really get developed as part of developing this insight pathway, the first way to Nibbāna. So very, very wonderful thing. So we will touch on that a little as we go along through the sessions. So I think that's probably enough for today. I don't think there's anything more I want to say. I think this was just a summary of the different steps that we will be looking at in our next session. So I think we will commence the insight pathway next session. We will start by looking at the first step of painful practice with slow realization. And I'll take you through briefly what these meditations are and what I would recommend in terms of kicking off the meditation. And we'll see how we go. We might get to the first jhana and maybe do a little practice. Let's see. I'll have a think about it, because I don't particularly want to rush. I want us to feel comfortable with the meditation, which I think is the point of the slow sessions. Okay, so if you have any questions, then note them down, or you can email. If anything comes up, I can bring it up during the session. Okay. So let's pay gratitude to the Buddha for these wonderful teachings, very wise teachings. Gratitude to the Noble Ones for helping us with this Dhamma. Gratitude to all our teachers and good friends who have helped us on this Dhamma path up until this point and continue to do so. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. Wishing you all well. Teruan Saranai.